Surprisingly, views on how Congress should respond to the Gulf oil crisis vary widely. Some see an opportunity for lawmakers to act on new energy legislation. Others warn Capitol Hill should avoid taking actions that would cripple the oil and gas industry. Two of the leading analysts are here this morning: Daniel Weiss, the Director of the Climate Policy at the Center for American Progress, and Dan Kish, the Senior Vice President for Policy at the Institute for Research. Good morning, gentlemen. Lee Fuller says, Dan, that independents will begin pulling out of the Gulf to some extent if the government overreacts. What did you think of that?
Well, first of all, companies who are producing oil and gas from federal lands ought to be able to make sure that they are responsible for any messes that they create. BP needs to be held fully accountable. You know, if there's a concern about having mom and pop oil and gas companies not doing deep water drilling, that's probably okay. We've seen in the horrible BP disaster that it's taken a lot of sophisticated technology to try and attempt to close the oil flood from the bottom, and even that hasn't worked. Could you imagine a smaller company trying to do that? It would be impossible. So if we raise the liability rates or have unlimited liability for the damages that they cause, that's okay if it drives out the smaller producers.
Yeah. What, Deb?
Well, I think I'd have to suggest that we'd have to be concerned about mom and pop and all the rest of Americans who are going to have to pay the increased costs or are going to have to bear the burden of importing the oil that will replace the oil that won't be produced in the Gulf of Mexico if the government overreacts in a way that this is not what we do when we have an airplane crash. What we do is we find out what's wrong, we move forward, we fix it, and establish rules that, in the meantime, what we don't do is stop all flights of...
with all due respect to that analogy, an airplane crash is a horrible tragedy, as is this. 11 people lost their lives, but an airplane crash does not affect the entire economy of an entire region like this BP oil disaster will. This could lead to billions, if not tens of billions of dollars in long-term economic and public health damages. An airplane crash unfortunately harms the people who are in the plane and those on the ground, but its impact is relatively narrow compared to this kind of disaster.
Let me ask you this, guys. Obama's taken a hit now politically over this. But down the road, does this help or hinder his energy agenda?
Well, I think right now they've made a decision that it helps their energy agenda, or at least their political agenda, in terms of moving the ball forward or trying to push this issue as a response to a crisis that gives them an opportunity. And I think that's pretty clear. The question is whether Americans who have shown time and time again that they're not interested in paying more for energy are going to change their position on that.
Well, do you see these positions changing enough to get, say, a climate change?
Well, President Obama has done two things. First, he's been focused on containing this disaster from day one. And there's the ramifications of this are going to last a long time. Oil from the Exxon Valdez is still washing up on the shores of Prince William Sound 20 years later. The fisheries there have not entirely recovered. But second, he's trying to also get at the root of the problem, which is our overdependence on oil. We import 2/3 of the oil that we use, and that is bad for our security and bad for our economy. What the president is going to be doing is working with Senator Reid and hopefully Republicans and Democrats to adopt policies that will dramatically reduce our long-term oil use, invest in cleaner cars, cleaner fuels, and public transportation.
But let me ask you a political question here. I mean, you need a handful of Republicans and as well as a handful of some conservative Democrats to make some of these laws happen on the Hill right now. I mean, is he likely to get these numbers? Do you see those kinds of a swing in support?
Well, it probably depends on exactly what ultimately goes in the bill, but
what will it take?
Well, it may take the sort of approach that they took in the healthcare bill, which is to, in essence, purchase votes from those people who are interested in particular provisions that
well, they tried that before. They offered offshore drilling a few months ago to get Republicans, and that doesn't seem to work right now. So.
No, it probably stands a little chance. But ultimately, they still have to cross that Rubicon of an energy tax and what that means to our economy and what it means to our competitiveness in the future. So we shall see. But
Do you see the votes? How do you get those additional votes? How do you make the case that you make?
I think the president has done a good job and will have to continue to do the good job of making the case that the long-term solution to the BP oil disaster is to dramatically reduce our use of oil through the investments in cleaner cars, cleaner fuels, and transportation, and reducing pollution from oil. I think the way to get the votes to that is put together provisions from various people's bills that would address that. For example, Senator Alexander of Tennessee has a bill to invest in electric vehicles. Great. Senator Hatch of Utah has a bill to invest in natural gas for trucks. Great. Okay. Let's pull all these things together, and once we bring a bill to the floor and say it's time to be called on the question, I think they'll be able to get the votes there.
That will be something interesting to watch for this summer. Dan Kish from the Institute for Energy Research, Dan Weiss from the Center for
Thanks for
American
having me.
Progress, thank you very much.